Testing? Okay.
Hello everyone, I'm Kloss of Studio Yuraki, and today I'm going to be showing you all how animation is made from concept to finished product. So a little bit about me. I'm the founder and director of Studio Yuraki. I'm most well known for creating the Internet Explorer Chen, the animated series. You have may seen my friend make the comic versions while we make the animated versions on our YouTube channel. And we also have been working with Otaku Versus, so if you've seen his recent videos, all the animation was made by us. But yeah, more about Studio Yuraki. We are an independent art, animation, and music production studio. We have a YouTube channel with over 100,000 subscribers where we release English covers as well as animated shorts. And a few of the people that we've worked with is Otaku Versus, Lily Pichu, Christina P, Nathan Sharp, Giggit, Joey the Anime Man, DJ Joe, C.VN, and a lot more. Recently, we had the amazing opportunity to work on a few animated cuts for this anime airing right now. How much can you weigh a dumbbell? So please check it out. And now we can start. All right, so the very first thing when it comes to creating, of course, any project is you need a concept. Now, what is a concept, or questions that I like to ask myself when making a concept is, what is your project's goal? Are you trying to captivate others or sell merchandise to your audience? What will be appearing visually? Characters, settings? Is it, just still images? Is it animation? And how will you pitch your concept to get others interested? So this is very important when you are just an individual with a big idea and you want companies to hear you. Well, you really need a solid concept to pitch them. Once you have your answers to these questions, you can begin making concept sketches, the next phase, to get your concept out there, basically, with visual understanding. So you're not just speaking words to someone, you can really show, hey, I've done something with this concept, and you can see more about my ideas. So right here is a character called Arufa for a massive visual novel that we're currently in pre-production. And these were his very first concept sketches of it. Here we have three sketches from my character designer depicting what I stated in emails or messages. So here we were looking at a knight, a very intimidating for the most part, and we all had the same idea with the mask for the first two options. And the third one is more experimental to really show a more intimidating factor to him. We understood that this person or this knight was a traveler, and we wanted him to be mysterious, especially his right shoulder. So we had that covered. And the hardest part about this individual that we were working on was his armor pieces. We wanted to make a character that didn't have or excessive bulky armor that would be unrealistic, and we wanted to make it light enough so that you can understand that this specific character is a traveler. Now here's another animation concept that we did. We're currently working on a little short for the Ruby series, a little fanimation actually. And my idea was, how would the Ruby universe look in a 2D animation style? Since a lot of people always say, it's like, oh, Ruby should be a 2D anime when it's 3D. Well, I really wanted to see what we can do with that. On the left, you can see the original concept pieces of the very famous Beowulf anime in the Ruby series. And to the right, you see our finalized version of this monster. On the left, you can kind of see like little details where it was a little bit bulky and we just had muscles. Well, we really wanted to show how he's not just a wolf, he's a monster of the Grimm universe. So we made sure that we added bones instead of too much muscle, and we added other little details to really bring out this anime. Over here, I'm going to show background and other concept sketches. This was made by our lead background designer for a print that we're actually selling at the autograph booth. is Princess Mononoke. So here we have the main character of Princess Mononoke on his mount. And we wanted to make a very beautiful forest for this print to really show the beauty of the whole film that Ghibli did. Now here's the finalized version. Yep. And then here you can just see like how we really brought out the life of the previous sketch. Here's another one that we're doing for the Ruby Fanimation. Yeah. I wanted to prove with this sketch here that not all sketches need to be very detailed. You don't have to be you'd have to be a fantastic artist to make your own concept sketches. So here is an example. I wanted to make sure that when I sent the artist this sketch, I wanted to make sure that he understood that this is the moon that I'm describing. On the back here, I was describing a mountain and a waterfall. I wanted to make sure that he understood where the character and the enemies will be placed. So I added a little red mark indicating the protagonist. And to left and right in green are the Beowulf. Little sketch here is a bridge. And underneath it is just the forest of that bridge. Here's the finished version of that sketch. Alright, so once you're done with the concept, you need to start getting into a script, a finalized version of your story that you're going to be telling to the masses. So what does the finished script help? Well, directors and producers envision how to direct their departments with your script done. Animation directors are able to begin deciding how to turn it into an animation. This is very important, why it's very good to have a manga, like already established in the animation industry, because we understand the entire story. We understand how the characters express themselves through their wording, and we also see basically a storyboard. Manga is a fantastic storyboard for us animation directors to work off of, because we not only see things in a form of literature, but we also see things in a form of art. And also concept artists are able to understand the nature of a character and begin to design something around that. So let's say that you just have an idea of a character. Well, the character designer might have some difficulties with, let's say, his facial proportion in particular, since a character's facial proportion can really show what type of, I guess, cliche he's a part of. Like, let's say a tsundere, or you know, the main protagonist, or that sticks out like a sore thumb. So here I wanted to show a detailed concept of, based off just the script alone. This here is actually a sketch of a visual novel that we're currently working on called A Simple Gesture. This here was a sketch made by the artist Doki Doki Literature Club, who's working on this visual novel with us. And here, this was her depiction of a scene that I've made. So here we have the indication of light, just so that I kind of described a little bit more, saying, oh, there's a puddle of water and I kind of want some shining light towards them. In the back I was describing a Japanese festival, hence their clothing as well. Here's the version of that CG out of the many that we're doing for this visual novel. And once we're done with the script and everything has been greenlit, we can finally begin pre-production. So in pre-production, we're starting to make the character designs a lot more, or giving a lot more information to them. So in this particular, like let's say during the concept. We're just fixing the color right now. Okay, thank you. Alright, so here we were, or let's say the concept of stages, we just had the first, or the front profile of this character, which is very common. And then in pre-production, we want to make sure that the animators understand who they are animating in every different way and different motion. So over here, we didn't really put the arm since we thought at the moment that this gives enough information about the arm. And later on, or maybe this slide doesn't, but we also have more detailed versions of just the arm alone so the animators understand that. But here we really wanted to make sure that they understand the clothing behind that arm. And it's very important, so let's say the animators are animating the character from behind so that they understand understand, okay, this is how his hair is supposed to look and not how I think it's supposed to look. Because the thing is, if they didn't know how the backside of this character was, everyone's going to have their own interpretation, especially when you have 5 animators working on one individual cut in animation. And then also here we have the color palette, so we make sure that every animator understands what his skin tone's supposed to look like, so that we make sure that there's no different shades of color, I guess, in his skin tone or his clothing. And so like for an example, this was a common thing that actually happened before, is sometimes the computer would read on, or actually your screen will think this is dark blue, while on other screens it might kind of look like a light blue. Well, making sure that we have a color palette set with your software, you can just click on the clothing and your computer will always know, okay, this is the type of shade this person used on this monitor. So this is the character Rufa in his pre-production stage. We added a lot of detail to make sure that every animator understands how his armor is supposed to look like. So here, for an example, even though this is covered, we don't know when we're going to have a blowing, or like a wind animation, I guess, that's going to blow his cloth upwards, revealing his belt. So we wanted to make sure that we indicated, okay, this is how it's supposed to look like underneath. We also removed every layer of his armor, making sure that everyone understands how these 2 layers look, how his gauntlet is supposed to look, and also his color palette. This is his sword. We make sure that they understand what the top of his sword will look like. Make sure what the back is going to look like compared to the front, so that he understands, okay, the front is supposed to have this, the back is supposed to be that. We also have the sides to make sure that they understand the width of the sword and also the length. So this is another pre-production background sketch that we made. This one here helps us a lot to visualize how a setting of a character is supposed to be. So this in particular was the samurai that we just saw here called Asahi. This is a CG also from our background, actually I should say, from our visual novel called Mask that we're still working on. But here, this greatly helps me envision how the animation is supposed to look like if we have that, or just a better grasp at what I'm supposed to write when I bring this entire town to life. So here we understand that it's a Japanese setting, but more of a fantasy mix to it. We wanted to make sure that mountains are grand, that it's a misty village within the ocean. And how we interpret his village, that's a fisherman village, hence why there's all these boats. So when I'm writing literature, this greatly, greatly helps for me to envision the smell of the air. And also this helps sound effect artists understand the types of sounds that they're supposed to be making. So later on, we're going to see how my sound effect artist interpreted a scene that we animated just by this background alone. So once we're done with pre-production, we're going to start beginning the very first stage of animation called storyboard, what I like to call the animator's blueprint. So here, I'm going to show a quick example of, bring this up. A storyboard that we did for a music artist for his music video. So let's see if you can read this. Yeah, you can. Or barely at least. So at the top left, we have cut 1, and this indicates the amount of seconds, so 0 to 12 seconds. And here we have the basis of what we got from the script. So it's daytime, establishing a slow trekking shot of the desert. There's a silhouette of a man, the protagonist, making its way across, carrying a shovel idly. In the far distance, there's a smoke rising from something unseen. So here on the storyboard, we did a quick sketch about the smoke in the distance, drew a little protagonist, and kind of drew a desert here. So this is just a still shot because we understand what the movement's supposed to look like. And here we kind of show more of a side shot of the character, his feet, and it's going to slowly pan upwards towards his face. And notice that it doesn't have to be too detailed. It can be very rough like this, and as long as there's enough information for the animator to later on understand what he's going to be animating, that's enough for a storyboard. Of course, when it came to working on how much your done goes away. The storyboards are far, far more detailed for very, of course, high quality production. But with us, this is sufficient for a small team. And then I'll just skim through and showing a little bit more of the cuts that we did. And basically, if you aren't aware of what a cut is, this is basically cut 07. And then when it's a different scene or a different background, I like to think of it like this. That's cut 8. Another one that we did for a Twitch streamer, actually, a small individual, but we did a little bit of a more detailed storyboard. Since the animation was only 5 seconds, we decided to add more movement to our storyboard this time. Later on, we'll see how the final version of this. Alright, so once we're done with the storyboard, this is when I like to introduce music to it. Let me actually backspace and further elaborate on music. So once the storyboard is done, I send the storyboard to our music artist, who, depending who the director is, since I do a lot of the directing for the studio's projects, I always work one-on-one with the musician, and I further explain what I'm looking for with this particular storyboard. So let's say the storyboard as an action scene. Well, I don't want him to do anything too cheerful for an action scene. I want him to make something very impactful. Sometimes I want the musician to make very key, timings with his music to make, or let's say a sword clash. Let's say I want a huge drum clash here, or a certain instrument to be, to be introduced at a very impactful scene during this action scene. But once we're done with the storyboard, and this is normally when the music's also being made, we also start voice acting. Let's see here. So here is a scene from our Internet Explorer Chan animated series, and this is what we sent our voice actor for Internet Explorer, and this is what she sent back to us and what we use in our final product. Oh, actually, never mind. So you actually won't be able to hear the audio, unfortunately, for this, but that's okay, actually. This is just showing what we sent here. On the top left, you see the words that we wanted to make sure that she's on cue with. Just further going. And then actually to explain this right here. This is just a little information that our animators noted to understand what the in-betweens are from this scene to this movement right here. Because when it comes to animation, information is very, very key. Everything relies on everyone's understanding of what they're supposed to do for each individual scene. So, to further explain about animation, I'd like to introduce to everyone what frames are. So these are the still images that create animation. So, what a frame is in an animation, or let's say for us, we do 12 individual frames to make one 1 second of animation. Now, studio standards tend to be 24 frames in Japan. And here, I'd like to show just a little animation that we did. So here's frame 1. Here's the second frame, a little bit more movement. Here's the third frame. Here's the fourth frame. In total, this makes a loop. And so, after that, I also want to explain what roughs are. So roughs are basically rough drafts or sketches of frames. And these these sketches involve a more solid idea of movement so that the animators understand, okay, so this is how the character is supposed to look like when animated, but during these roughs, you may not be giving a lot of information, which we'll see right here. So these are the 4 frames in its very rough stages. We just make sure that they understand how the eyes look like, her mouth, and her face, and then the hands aren't that very detailed. But they will later on once we're cleaning everything up. So keyframes. So this is a drawing that defines the starting and end point of any transition of movement in the animation. So here's actually an example. Actually, if you can look at my arm really quick. So let's say right here is a keyframe for keyframe 1, and over here is keyframe 2. Well then, in this empty space, we're going to be calling these in-betweens. And that's what's going to be making sure that it doesn't look like a solid just chop and movement, but it looks solid. So here is a keyframed animation. There you go. Thank you. Alright, and then what I just explained is in-betweens, the frames that are in between the keyframes, giving the illusion of movement during the transitions. So like I said, you will have your keyframes, and then your in-betweens, and then end it with the keyframe. Here's that same animation with the in-betweens implemented. So as you can tell, it seems a lot more smoother than what we saw previously. So once we're done with all the rough stages of animation, technically, everything that's before coloring, and sometimes cleanup, as long as we understand what the timing is for the entire animation, this is where we make audio adjustments, making sure that the audio and animation are in sync, so that we make sure that when we're lip syncing to the voice actor's recordings, we make sure that we don't overdo it, and she's still, talking when clearly the voice actor has ended. And this is when I also like to start cleaning up. So it's tidying up any messy drawings, like the roughs that you saw previously. We make sure that now the animators understand how the hands look like, how our eyes, or everything pretty much, looks like compared to the character sheet that I've given them. So here is just a clean, or actually, no, this is a rough version of our mass overload teaser that we're currently making. So right here, you can kind of see how we've cleaned up everything. Of course, the bad guy in the back is still roughed, but our main purpose of this was making sure that Katsumi was cleaned, the person in the mask. And you can see here that we have the indication of 1, 2, the amount of in-betweens, and as well as some very light coloring of indication, making sure that you understand what the shades are. The red right here is just making sure that this is a yellow line on his shoe, or actually his pants, and everything else here is going to be the same color palette, this time a dark gray. Let's see. This is the same animation, but with in-betweens. Alright, so once we've done cleaning up everything, this is where we line, and this is when everything's pretty much final in terms of animation. Once we do this, it's very difficult for the most part, or very tiring to redo the lining phase, but we're basically tracing over every single individual frame and vectoring them so that it can be colored. So here's what it looks like for an animation to be lined. So as you can see here, we go back. The line artist has made sure that that the blue indicates shades in her clothes and her hair, and also her cap. And this is very important so that the colorist understands where to color in the shades and how are the shades moving in the lighting. So for example, if you look at her cap right here, you can barely see a blue line, making sure that this area of the hat is bent, so there should be shades here. But the moment she stands up, her hat has been lifted up, and there's no shades, indicating that the light source is all neutral here. Yeah, that's strange. It's moving on my computer. So. Yeah, oh shoot. Sorry about that. See if I can get it right. Sorry about that, little technical difficulties with the HDMI, but I'll actually upload this on Twitter if you guys want to see the visual reference that I was describing here. So now we're going to go into coloring. So of course we're giving every single frame color. Here's a more detailed color palette, and my showcase to show the coloring itself is very, very important and not such a light job that a lot of people think it is. So here's a character that we actually animated from the Toho series called Tenchi Inaue. And yeah, so like the example that I like to give is imagine coloring this character 240 times just to make 10 seconds of animation. Now here you can see her entire color palette, making sure that everyone understands the different shades, her belt, back of her hair, her cap, her eyes, and even her teeth and mouth. So once we're done with the animation, this is where we go into post-production, the final stages before publishing the finished product. This is where we're going to be editing everything, adding filters, adding sound effects if we haven't done that already. But everything pretty much making it ready to release it on television. So this is a very good example that I like to show everyone about how important post-production is, especially artists too. So here's a Otaku versus character called Oda-chan. And this is just her colored version of what we did and not any post-production stuff like the filters, which I'm going to show to you now. Just kind of notice like her skin tone and everything around her, how the palettes kind of seem bland. Well, this is why I think filters are so incredibly important, because here you can now see that her skin looks more lively, the color of her hair stands out, and it's very different compared to her shades, and everything just seems more balanced than just very plain. It's also very important when it comes to backgrounds and blending in this background with the character of an anime character. Because just having a neutral color, like I showed here, the background would stick out a lot, and I feel like it would remove the immersion of the viewer. So here's a very good example of how we implemented filters to make sure everything blends in easier, it's less straining on the eyes, and you're more concentrated on one thing. So here's the background that we did for Oda-chan that we haven't added a filter. And then this is afterwards. Make sure that the character or the background itself seems more lively. It blends into more of an anime aesthetic and not too realistic to diverse from its from the anime characters. And less straining on the eye for the most part. So you're more concentrated on one thing. Now I wanted to show you the animation that we did before. And this is the finished version. Shoot, 1 sec. And then unfortunately I cannot show, or you cannot hear the sound effects, but this video is uploaded on our Twitter. Let's see. Still not. actually, I have a good idea. I think I have this file we can pull up. There you go. So right here is a very interesting thing that we wanted to test out. We wanted to make sure that the background itself had individual layers so that there was more depth into this animation that people can notice. So right here, if you notice, or if you look at the rock, you can start to see that the rock here is moving at a different pace than the background, making more sense of depth. So right here, you can kind of see like the tree is slowly being revealed, or the backside is being covered by the rock. So here's a better example that you can now see what the house looks like than before. And this is actually the very first episode of Internet Explorer, and I should have the file. So unfortunately, you won't be hearing what she has to say, but please check it out on our YouTube channel. I just would like to show what we've also done in our animation department. That's it for me. If you would like to ask more questions, please walk up to the microphone. If not, I can actually talk a little bit more about my studio and how I got into animation, how I became an animation director and all these things.
Yes, so the question I have is that in the coloring process, you said that to take 10 seconds of animation of one character, you have to draw them like 240 times about. Is there like any like shortcuts around that, or like do you have to like do it completely by scratch?
So yeah, so in the form of animation that we do is called traditional hand-drawn animation. And this is when you draw every single frame of animation by scratch with hand, either digitally or more traditionally on paper. In our studio in particular, we do everything digitally, as we find it very difficult to draw on paper, but traditional paper-drawn animations are still very used in Japan still. But other than that, like other forms of animation that do have shortcuts are like 3D, or actually yeah, 3D animation, where it's computer generated, as well as vector animation. But to me personally, I don't think they give too much creativity as to what we can draw by hand. And actually, one of like the directors was talking about how there's companies that do want to make shortcuts for us, that they do want to do in-betweens, and a computer or create a software algorithm that can do this type of stuff. In particular, cleaning actually, or not cleaning, and coloring is what it's looking like to really start up in the next few years. But in terms of actually creating in-betweens by computer, we really dislike that idea in particular, because if it does, you're really creating, or you're really killing the art of hand-drawn animations. You're really killing, well, jobs of course, but also the creative liberties and the really impressive feat what we can accomplish by hand. Yes?
Hello.
Yes.
First of all, thank you for the presentation. It was very informative and fun.
Thank you.
I had a question. I know that animation production is a fairly expensive process on its own. So where do you get your financing from? Where do you get your funds? Thank you.
So now we're fortunate enough that we've opened up our doors to accept commissions from studios and individuals. So that's our biggest form of funding at the moment. And of course our YouTube channel has been doing pretty well. But other than that, it's been YouTube, our commissions, and our Patreon has been enough at the moment to help fund the studio with our small team. But at the start, it was very difficult. It was a lot of saving up money for the most part. Actually, it's like later on I'll kind of explain how I started off the studio to be more informative. But yeah, it's mostly like the story of the studio is I started off as an indie company or an indie game company, I should say in particular. So we started off with very, very little or very little money. So everything was pretty much a build up for the last 4 years, 3 to 4 years. But once our YouTube channel started to kick off with our English covers, that's where everything started to be a lot easier for me to fund, basic animators. And once we started having a set team of animators, we opened our doors to accept animations and art commissions, of course. And then once that started going, we started getting the ball rolling to get to where we are now. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for coming and presenting this whole thing.
Thank you.
I just want to ask, in your experience, what has been the most challenging thing, trying to make a successful animation studio?
Well, there's a lot of things actually, because the main problem that I faced, as many of you who do start doing anything, I guess, in social media, is your social media presence. That was the most difficult. We were doing a lot of original concepts to promote our game and promote our music. But original content on the internet really doesn't surface. It really doesn't help bring the masses, I guess, quickly. So when we understood this is when I started moving towards our YouTube channel, and in particular creating English anime covers, as I knew there was a niche and something that a lot of people have been asking to create, I guess, niche songs for the most part. So once we started getting our audience from YouTube, that's things in that department started to become a little bit easier. But of course, funding is still very difficult, especially when you're trying to pay for everything that we do or did on our YouTube channel. A lot of people said when we first started off that our quality was very high, and I was very proud of that. But not a lot of people understood how much money it took to produce such a high quality video, and the investment that also the risk, I guess, putting into our YouTube channel in order for it to snowball to where we are now. I guess that was definitely the most challenging, because you want to make you want to choose your risks and what you do wisely, or else you might come down crashing. But other than that, I think the other challenging part was directing everyone. Since I'm the founder and I didn't want to purchase managers for me, as that would just be wasting more money, where I can put it into other artists or other talented individuals to make our studio, I decided to take everything by myself. So at the time, I really had to abandon a lot of things and really focus on making myself available, so that when my animators had a question, I was ready to do a call for however long in order to address our to address a certain scene. And same thing with the musicians, I would have to talk to them, and it was really a huge struggle to plan out my schedule and working with everyone's time zones. Because the other thing is, everyone works at home. Actually, for Studio Yuraki, we don't have a set studio, as I find it that it would be very expensive to just pay a monthly for a studio where everyone has to move, especially to California, where it's very expensive here. I just didn't think it was a good investment. So everyone works out of state, or even out of country, actually. So it's very difficult working with people in Asia at 2 in the morning, trying to explain to them what their daily task is, or their morning task, or all these errors. I think the other thing too is also responding to emails. Like I said, I think PR is also very, very challenging. You need to know what to say, and and always help who's commissioning you very well, so that they feel very satisfied, and that we give them a very reliable service. Other than that, there's not too many challenges luckily arising other than what I stated. I guess the only individual or the other challenging thing outside of that is I guess understanding what to do next, and writing in particular. I still find it writing is the most difficult thing for me to do, especially I'm writing the visual novel, A Simple Gesture, and it's just very, very difficult, because I want to make sure that the writing is just as good as the visuals, and and that itself is just very difficult in the English language since there's so many things to word a sentence, and depending how you word something can be the most impactful thing you've done to like someone in terms of storytelling, or it can also just be very bland. Like, let's say you're killing off a character or something like that. You want to make sure that you've done a very good job, that they feel, I guess, a sort of emotion, like of sadness from this character's death. And I find it just very difficult understanding this is enough and not overdoing it, I guess. And also understanding this isn't enough and I need to do more. So, hopefully that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you.
So to further elaborate on stuff, so I'm actually self-taught when it comes to animation and also like directing, and this is a very popular question that I get often when I do these panels is, how did I learn? Well, I actually started off doing hand-drawn animations of stick figures since I was 13 on a program called Flipnote Studio on the 3DS, and that was like such an eye-opener to the world of hand-drawn animation. But other than that, like how I became an animation director, or even learning the animation production cycle, was by watching tons and tons and tons of documentaries of interviews and also directors. So in particular, my favorite documentary of all time when it comes to these production documentaries is the Kill la Kill Episode 1 documentary, which I think you can find on YouTube still. But this documentary basically brought you how Kill la Kill Episode 1 was made from its very first concept and its script, and the stresses that the directors and producers had to overcome, as well as the time restriction that they had to do. Because in the end, you realize that Episode 1 was barely finished a few hours before it aired. So it was really, really stressful for everyone to get everything done on time. But other than that, yeah, it's like documentaries, you can just learn so much more of the director's insights, how they envision a project, and I think it's the most useful information that you can ever get. And further elaborate on the previous question I just got, is when did Studio Yuraki start? Well, I started the studio in 2016. Back then it was a 3-man indie studio creating a JRPG called Oranos. But later that changed to become the story for the visual novel we're still working on called Mask. And because of this visual novel Mask, that's what really brought everyone, or all of the core members of Studio Yuraki together. And I'm still very fortunate enough that all these core members who started the studios 3 years ago are still with us today. One of these individuals is Sam Luff. If you've seen our YouTube covers, then you know who that person is. And then of course, like I said, I realized that we needed a lot more time, and we also needed to gain a following. We needed more funding, so that we had that we stood a better chance at executing such a massive scaled project such as Mask, especially to the level that I envisioned it to be. So this is when I basically started doing the English covers so I can get a following. And then this is also when I opened up our doors to take on commissions from individuals who wanted a studio quality illustration of their original character, or Twitch notifications for small streamers so they can stand out from the more popular ones. And then, of course, lastly, the most recent thing I've been doing to help promote our studio and to really show that yes, we can execute a visual novel really well is, of course, the Simple Gesture, who I have been very fortunate enough to work with the character artist of Doki Doki Literature Club, Sancheli. And if you're interested in this project and you want to learn more about it, well, we have a Twitter page at Studio Yuraki, and there's also the visual novels Twitter page called @SimpleGesture_VN, where you can keep up to date to what the entire visual novel is about. We've been recently releasing all of the music tracks onto our Twitter, and we've also been releasing a lot of the CGs that will be featured in the visual novel. And also another important question that I think a lot of people are curious to know is, why don't I pitch my ideas to companies? Well, here in the US, we face a lot of censorship and creative restrictions, especially since the form of directing I wish to take with my stories is the form of anime. Here in the US, there's a huge stigma still where companies really won't deny anything related to anime at all. Like, I've heard stories of a few friends of mine actually who work on a short animation actually who had a successful Kickstarter called True Tale. And these individuals have been trying to promote this project for years. And all the directors from this animated short called True Tale are from Nickelodeon, Warner Brothers, and other studios. And for the past 3 years, they've been telling me that every single studio has denied their idea because of the form of art style that they wanted to take. So they changed their art style, they changed the script, and unfortunately, even then, studios really didn't want to accept their idea as it's not what they're looking for in U.S. television. But countless of times, like especially when I was making Mask, people were like, oh, you know, maybe I should pitch the character sketches and stuff like that to like Netflix or something like that. Well, nowadays I'm very fortunate enough that Netflix and like Crunchyroll are companies that are willing to hear your ideas for this type of stuff. But I really don't want to be restricted of my creative liberties, and I really want to take the project to exactly the length that I wish to take it. And I feel like all the animators feel the same way. When you're animating, you want to express yourself to the fullest form. And it really sucks when you work on something very hard and a studio or a higher up has said, no, we can't do this, this is too gruesome, or this is too violent, or something like that. And like I said, you're drawing countless and hundreds of frames just to make this amazing action sequence just for it to get turned down. Also, I feel like that art and animation schools teach a very realistic art style in the U.S., which I can't really blame them. But and these schools really don't approve of anime itself. So I've seen a lot of our animators who go to schools and say, I really want to learn the animation style of anime, but of course these schools won't give them the opportunity to. Which is also another reason why I have not been able to find a really good animation, or an animator I should say, a really good animator in the US who can execute the form of anime to what I wish it to be. So far, everyone who has been out of seas. On that, I think that's really about it. If you do have any other questions regarding the past of the studio, now's the time to ask it. But if you have any more questions that you really want me to further elaborate, well, I'll be here tomorrow at my booth, or actually I'll be here Saturday and Sunday from time to time. Please check us on Twitter when I'm announcing that I'll be at my booth for about an hour or two. And also, if you're curious on purchasing one of our prints, it really helps us develop it in our studio. Other than that, thank you so much, guys. We enjoyed.